All right, good morning everybody and welcome to the third webinar in our series. So this is open access for the Humanities, Arts and Social Sciences librarians. It's going to be focusing today on outputs that are kind of commonly produced by the HAS subjects. So we're going to be looking more at monographs than kind of journal articles. Today, I'm just going to define a few things about open access for you in case you're not too familiar with open access. Bear with me if you know it all already. I'm going to talk about some open access policies and whether they cover books or book chapters and kind of compare them to the policies for journal articles. And then I'm going to talk about open access book publishing options, so kind of green open access and gold open access options. All the images I'm using in this presentation are CC0, so freely available to use by anyone, unless otherwise stated. So open access, if you're completely new to open access, it's basically just making a version of your work freely available online, so that anybody in the world can access it as long as they have an internet connection. It's often abbreviated to just OA, and I'll be using that abbreviation a lot today. If there's any other abbreviations I use and you don't understand, please let me know, because sometimes we have a tendency to talk in jargonese a little bit. So green open access, this is making the accepted version of your work available. So the accepted version is the one that's being through peer review, and the editors of the book or the journal, whatever it is that's going to be published, and said, yes, we will publish this work. Green open access often comes with a kind of an embargo period, so you can share the accepted version of your work, but it has to be after a certain time, so maybe 12 months after publication. And usually it's shared in a repository, so publishers will allow you to share the accepted version of your work in different places, and sometimes they have different embargoes, and it really depends on the different publishers. But usually when we're talking about open access and sharing versions of your work to make it open access, we're talking about sharing it in a repository. So gold open access is when the published version of your work is freely available online. So this is a nice kind of shiny typeset version produced by the publisher that's kind of all the bells and whistles version. And usually you have to pay a fee in order to make the work open access. And that's because the publishers have invested kind of time and money into that version, and therefore they want to kind of make sure that their business is profitable. And again, when we're talking about gold OA, we're talking about sharing it on a repository. You can usually share it wherever you like because it would have something like a Creative Commons license. But when we're thinking about open access, we're thinking about sharing on open access repositories. So this little diagram just neatly summarizes the two different versions of the work that we're talking about. So we've got the author's accepted manuscript, sometimes called the AAM, sometimes just called the accepted manuscript, and the AM. So that is the one that has been through peer review here. And then there's the version of record, or VOR, as it's sometimes called, which is the version right at the end. And the difference between the two is when you sign the copyright transfer agreement, generally you own the author's accepted manuscript, or the author does, but the publisher will own the version of record, and indeed the proofs, because they're putting time and effort into the typesetting. So some open access policies. You might be familiar with some of these, you might not, and I've put onto this table the different policies around journal articles as well as book chapters, datas and theses, because I think it gives a really nice kind of comparison of where the funders' policies are sitting at the moment. So there's the HEFKI policy, and this is the one that concerns the REF. So it's set by government and affects all researchers in the UK. And their policy really only applies to articles and also conference proceedings. I could have put another column in my table. But they don't really care about books or book chapters. So my book with chapter in brackets column refers to books or book chapters or monographs. I'm kind of going to use those terms interchangeably today. The AHRC and ESRC are both funding bodies, so that's the Arts and Humanities Research Council and the Economic and Social Research Council. They're both part of RC UK, so Research Councils UK. So they have the same policies, and they require theses to be shared, journal articles and conference proceedings to be shared, data to be shared, but they don't require books or book chapters to be shared at the moment. So it's a real difference between if you're thinking about STEM subjects and arts, humanities and social science subjects there. Then the Wellcome Trust you also might be familiar with, because they have a policy around journal articles, and the Open Access Service here administers the funds for them. And again, they require journal articles and conference proceedings to be shared. They also require data to be shared, like RC UK. They don't require any theses to be shared, so they're not affecting PhD students, but they do require books and book chapters to be shared, and they actually have a separate fund available for this, which we don't administer in the Open Access Service, but they administer themselves. So that's a little bit confusing from the Wellcome Trust. It's a bit annoying really for us to administer, because it's not clear for researchers where they should be getting their funds from. But we can always point them in the right directions if we get asked. The Wellcome Trust policy on book chapters also requires the chapter to be deposited in, I think it's called PubMed Bookshelf. So they have a deposit form on their website. So if you're a Wellcome Trust funded author, you've written a book or a book chapter, you simply just have to go to the website, fill out their forms, make sure it gets deposited in the right places, and then there's money to make it open access if that option is available from the publishers. The ERC, again, I'm using this quite loosely for any kind of European funding that's coming from the ERC, has slightly different policies depending on which scheme you're on. So FP7 differs from Horizon 2020. Horizon 2020 is a much stricter policy, but in general they all include articles and conference proceedings. They all include data has to be shared. They don't worry about theses, and some of them include book chapters. So Horizon 2020, I believe, does. FP7 also will allow you to make book chapters open access as well. So it's really, you have to check on the different schemes as to whether you're required or requested to make books and book chapters open access. Now the final two entries on my table are British Academy and Leverhulme, so kind of two of the really big funders for the humanities, arts and social sciences, and so kind of always think, great, what are they going to do? Are they going to lead the way on open access in this field? Well, the answer is no. They don't really have any policies around sharing things for open access. And actually the British Academy produced a report, which I think there might be a link later to in the presentation, that basically said why open access, as it currently stands, doesn't work for the arts, humanities and social sciences. And that's because the researchers are publishing a lot in books, and actually the model for open access doesn't work in books currently, or doesn't work as well as it does in journals, I should say. So they don't require anyone to share anything. British Academy require you to share any digital resources that have been produced as part of your research. So I'll kind of put that loosely in the data column, because the digital resources are likely to become some kind of data or some kind of output that you've produced as part of your research. But that's it. They don't require you to share anything else. Now, requiring or not for you to share certain outputs kind of comes with a money side as well, and the policies that do require you to share generally stump up some cash to help you do that. The HEFGI policies always recommend that you go for the green open access. They don't have any money to help for gold open access, so they don't expect you to ever go gold. But councils like HRC, ESRC, part of RCK, the Wellcome Trust, ERC, all stump up cash in order for you to meet their open access policies for articles and book chapters. Now, there are often restrictions or requirements and certain limitations on how those funds can be used, so you can't just assume that because there is a big pot of money that you'll have access to it. So for example, the ERC will only pay for fully open access outputs. They won't pay for a publication in a hybrid output. So the journal or the book has to always be fully open access, not kind of part subscription, part open access. And again, things like the research councils and the Wellcome Trust will only pay for open access if it meets their license requirements and the green option doesn't meet their embargo requirements. There are also some other funds available that if you want to make things open access, but you're not required. So that's a bit of positive news. So HLC will allow you to make your book chapter open access and charge it to your grant if you've costed it into your grant, which is excellent. And LeverHume will also allow you to charge open access fees to your grant for articles and book chapters. So they are encouraging open access for things like books and book chapters, but they're just not requiring it at the moment. And I think that's a really positive move, that they're recognising that there is that need and desire there from researchers. So, open access policies. So you might be asking, why are they focusing on journals and not books? Well, really, it's been a lot easier to introduce this open access business model to journals. And so I'm going to present a really overly simple business model here for libraries and how journal and books work. Please forgive me if this is kind of a real passion of yours in the library world. So journals, libraries pay subscriptions, and we pay huge amounts of money to different publishers every year for having a subscription to their journals. But also readers might pay to access journals or articles if they don't have a subscription. If you introduce open access to articles, you kind of remove that reader pays avenue for money to flow into the publishers. But that's okay, because even if the author just pays once to make that paper open access, and millions of people around the world read that paper, the publishers are still making money out of journal subscriptions. So they're still recouping revenue that way. For books, there are huge production costs for each and every book. And they work on a kind of reader pays model. I'm ignoring ebooks here, so please forgive me about that. And generally, they want lots of readers to buy that book and to pay money. They do a market kind of cost analysis and decide whether there's a potential for that book to sell before they'll agree to publish it. If you remove that and have the author pays throwaway model, the author's just paying once to make that book open access rather than having lots and lots of readers pay. So actually you're reducing the amount of potential income that's coming in for that book, but still the production costs are very high. So it's not seen as a very sustainable way to make books open access. And actually we'll look at some of the cost charged a bit later on by some of the traditional publishers to make books open access, and you'll see they're huge, and that's a way that they're trying to kind of recoup lost revenue, as it were, from where the reader pays model is kind of gotten rid of. So why make your book open access? Well, there are loads of benefits, and actually some of these are summarised in the Guide to OA Monograph Publishing that was published by Jess, and the links are down there at the bottom of the slide. And it's also appeared in your chat box if you want to go and look at it right now. There's no price barrier, so books can be vastly expensive. You know, when I was studying for my PhD, I remember spending kind of 80, 90 quid on one handbook that's kind of vital for my research, and thinking, crikey, I hope there aren't too many other books that I need to buy off my reading list. So actually that's really expensive, and you think I'm coming from quite a privileged position in terms of being in Europe, being at leading universities, having a scholarship to do my studies. So if you think about other people around the world who don't necessarily have that money available to buy books, or libraries even who have really tight budgets and have to choose a limited number of books to read, you know, having things open access really helps with the price issue. You also get wider readership if it's open access, and there's a really great example of this from open book publishers, who I'll talk about a bit later, who have been publishing books on research that spans kind of around the world. And one of the books they published was on Zambian kind of storytelling, sorry. And actually, they could see that loads of people in Africa were accessing the open access version of the book, which they made freely available online, which otherwise they wouldn't have had access to because the costs are prohibitive, or they don't have access to the libraries, or you know, they're not part of an academic kind of institution, so they might not have access to the books that way. Open access books have also when shown to have increased discoverability. So online discoverability increased by 142% for OA books according to the Guide to OA Monograph Publishing, and that's based on Google book views. So actually, if things are open access, people are finding them online and they are able to read them. And that's a really positive step as well. So with the wider reach and increased discoverability working together, you can really push your research out there. And of course, they have greater impact. If more people are reading them, more people are citing them, more people are picking them up, and therefore it helps with impact. So green books. So there are two ways to share your books with open access. So there's the green and the gold. Green books is a bit hit and miss sometimes. I think actually open access to all books is a bit hit and miss. Not all publishers will let you archive the accepted manuscript. Some will, some won't. Some will only let you share one chapter or kind of 10% of a book. If it's an edited volume, you might only be able to share your chapter. And if someone else in that book wanted to share their chapter, they might not be able to share on the same repository, but they'd have to share on a different repository. There are also kind of little rules about how you share different chapters. But actually, and it can be quite difficult to find out what the publishers will allow you to do with your accepted version. I've spent many an hour trying to look this up in the open access team. But actually, there's a community maintained list that helps you work out the self-archiving rules of some of the main publishers. And this list is maintained by people working in the open access sphere around the UK. So it's started off by the UK Core List, that's the UK Council of Research Repositories, which is a bunch of like-minded individuals all working in open access and repositories, and they're just sharing the kind of the knowledge they've gained about whether or not you can archive accepted manuscripts for books. So it's a really great resource. I use it quite often when someone tries to archive their book in the repository. And of course, just remember it's a community maintained list, so the information might not always be up to date or accurate, but it's a really good place to start, and it should have links to different publisher pages. So I'd really recommend that. And if you're thinking about sharing your green version, I've got two recommendations really. The first one's completely biased because I work for the OSC. The first one's in the institutional repository Apollo, and you can share book chapters or whole books there if you like, and if you're allowed to for copyright. The other one is the OAPEN repository. I don't know how to pronounce it. I've never worked it out. Open. Let's go with that. And that's a repository that is kind of supported by the ERC. They've put lots of money into it, and if you publish a book chapter and you're ERC funded, you're required to put it into this repository. And it's a repository specifically for books and book chapters. That's a really good resource as well if you're looking for material to read. So gold books. There are a range of choices for making a book, or maybe just a chapter of that book fully open access. So typically in edited volumes where there are a number of contributing authors, you can choose to make your chapter open access or not if you wish, as opposed to the whole book. And traditional publishers are normally quite pricey, as I was saying earlier. So this is a little screenshot from our website, and it just lists some of the charges that the publishers will charge for an open access book. So CUP standard charge is £6,500 with kind of extra money for extra words. People like Springer charge about €50,000, Palgrave £11,000. So these kind of the traditional publishers, as I'm calling them, the kind of commercial publishers, some of them are charging huge amounts of money. And you can see also in the tables, so there are some publishers charging less, and I'll kind of come to them in a minute. But actually, this is why open access for books hasn't really taken off, because the charges have been so prohibitive for these kind of commercial publishers, which really have taken hold of the book publishing world. University presses are kind of trying to do something about it, and a lot of them offer reduced rates or waivers, especially from authors from their own institution. Unfortunately, Cambridge University Press doesn't offer any discounts or waivers for Cambridge authors because they don't want to be seen as favouring Cambridge and that they're unbiased, etc., etc. White Rose University Press, which is Leeds, Sheffield and York universities kind of come together, offer a sliding scale of fees. So depending on what services you need, kind of depends how much you're charged. So if you're happy to do all the proofreading and copy editing and typesetting yourself, and you just need them to kind of print your book, it'll cost you just the amount that it takes them to print the book. So that's really good and gives authors kind of options to have as much work done as they can afford. UCL Press, which is quite another quite young university press, offer waivers for non-UCL authors, and they give preference to early career researchers because they understand how it can be quite difficult for people just starting out in their research to get grants to publish. And so they've got this initiative to really help young researchers coming up, and I think that's a really good one. I'm really pleased to see that. Independent publishers might have completely different business models, and I've got two here, Open Book Publishers and Open Humanities Press. Open Book Publishers was set up by a couple of people in Cambridge, and they're quite local, they're very nice, we get them to speak at a lot of our events, and they have a business model, so they're a social enterprise, and Open Humanities Press are a non-for-profit company. So I couldn't find anything about Open Humanities Press, whether they charge, if they charge anything, or how books are paid for. But Open Book Publishers they cost them something like, I think it's about £5,000 to publish a book, and they ask you to try and get grants to help pay for that. But if you can't get grants, then they'll publish your book for free anyway. So that's really good, I think. So it kind of they rely on researchers trying to bring some money in, and also from fundraising from other resources. But they will publish your book even if you can't pay for it, which I think is really great. And again, is removing barriers away from early career researchers, especially who have difficulties getting grants and kind of establishing their research. Open Book Publishers also do really cool things. I'm a massive fan of their books. So they do kind of new formats for publishing. So they do things like embedding digital files into books. And I've got an example of one here. So this is the Storytelling in Northern Zambia. And as you go through the book, you'll come across QR codes. So if you can see in the picture on the right, there's a little picture in the top right, and then in fact, I put some circles in my presentation to make this easier. So you can see in the top right, there's a little QR code. So if you've got your phone and you're reading this book, you can just zap that, and it'll take you to a YouTube video. And if you don't have your phone, or you're not you're reading it online, you can just go to there's a link right down at the bottom as well that'll take you to the YouTube video. So the link I've put here at the bottom of the presentation should take you to that page, so then you can see for yourselves how these links work. And once you follow that link, it goes to YouTube, and then you see a video of the person telling the story. And this is really important for this research, because actually hand movements and hand gestures are really important in the process of storytelling. So it means that you can read the research, and also you can understand it visually as well as just reading the writing about it. And I think that's really cool, and they do it for things like music files as well, and all sorts of other videos. It's great. And they also do other things, so they do ebooks for free. So if you go to their website, you can read PDFs or HTML versions, so it's completely open access for all the books. And if you wanted to buy a hard copy, you can, and that's where they might charge you some fees. As Cambridge, people from the University of Cambridge, you get discounts. But anyone can access the ebooks online. And they try and do them in formats so that people who are using, say, 2G kind of mobile networks for the internet can also download the books as well. You know, the file sizes aren't so big that kind of poor internet is restrictive. They also do things like collaborative books, where people can contribute to books as well. So you might think, but what about the quality? There's kind of a bit of a myth around that open access means poor quality, where I'm here to kind of bust that myth. It doesn't necessarily. Publishers like Open Book Publishers and the Open Humanities Press conduct rigorous peer review. So they also have really rigorous peer review, and you can read about their peer review processes and criteria on their website. So open access doesn't mean poorer quality. I think some of the kind of more traditional commercial publishers like pushing that about, but don't believe them. But you should also be aware of predatory publishers. There are publishers out there who say, we can publish a book, we'll make it open access, blah, 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 blah. But then no one reads it, and they actually charge extortionate fees for it. Claire Sewell actually gave a presentation about this for the library community a couple of months ago, and that's available on our repository, so you can go and have a look at that if you're interested in publishing predatory publishers. So, what happens if you can't charge your grant for open access books and you really want to make your book open access? Well, the sad news is there aren't many funds available, and I've put a link here to a page on the Nature website, but actually you can see this list is reused on many different websites. This just happened to be the Nature one's the first one I came across. And if you look at it, it's actually quite depressing because it lists them by country, and there are very few funds under each country. And when you do find a fund, often it's a university press, and often it's for researchers from that university. So it's pretty depressing. I was hoping when I was checking this out the other day that there would be more funds available by now, but there aren't. So that's quite a sad situation. So I would suggest that you consider lobbying your college or your department or your faculty to start a fund. So you could say, yeah, have you got a spare £5,000 or something just to help early career researchers publishing books? Why not? Might be worth a try. And if you're interested in doing that, or you'd like some more information or some help, you can always contact us, and we'll be pleased to help you. And just a small note, Professor Steve Connor from the English faculty is a huge fan of open access, and he's actually on the Open Humanities Press Board. So English might be a good place to start if anyone out there is listening from the English faculty. So I didn't want to end this presentation on a depressing note, so I've gone for the future's bright, right? And I think it is. If you look at funder policies around open access, especially the HEFKI policy, they're all acknowledging that actually open access books is becoming increasingly important and is something that you need to think about and address in the future. So it's likely that when the next REF comes along in 2026 or whatever it's going to be, that books will be, open access books will be part of it, just like open access journals are now. And funders are thinking about open access books, and they're watching the publishing world, and they're watching the models, and they're looking at how open access journals and the costs for that are going, and I think they are considering what to do about monographs. So I'm quite hopeful that things will change, but part of that change is also educating our researchers about open access and how open access for books works, and hopefully you will go out to your libraries and help us do that. So that's where I'm going to end it, and just say thank you for watching. If you've got any questions, please feel free to contact us. Claire will be sending feedback forms very soon. If not in the chat box, she'll be sending them out via email. And if you've got any questions, please feel free to type in the chat box, and I'll do my best to answer them. Thank you.